Welcome back, second graders. So today we are doing two more read alouds from our Engage New York Domain 3 on the ancient Asian civilizations. So today we are talking about Buddhists and Buddhism. What you might remember from a few videos ago is we talked about Hindus and Hinduism. So Buddhism is another religion that was started in India, part of the Indus River Valley that we've been discussing. So I just want to remind everyone watching that this is not an attempt to make you think that this is the way you need to think or get you to believe what they believe. It's just an opportunity to kind of expand and help us to understand how other people view this world we live in. So just approach it with an open mind and just listening for listening's sake. So our first one is called Buddhists and Buddhism. So let's get started. Just a reminder, I don't stop for our discussion questions that we had in class. I don't go over vocabulary, and I don't do the comprehension questions at the end of these videos. This is just the read aloud itself. If you would like any of those things, please email me or dojo me, or I can give you access to them on Google. So let's get started. So, looking at this photograph, this is the Great Stupa of Sanchi, one of the many sacred dome-shaped shrines built all over Asia to honor the Buddha, who's the founder of Buddhism. Today, you will learn a little bit about Buddhism, the world's fourth largest religion, and the Buddhists who practice this religion. It all began about 2,500 years ago with the birth of Siddhartha Gautama in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. Siddhartha was a prince born to very rich parents. Siddhartha's parents loved him very much, so much, in fact, they wanted to protect him from all the suffering in the world. By doing so, they thought he would always be happy. So, Siddhartha was kept behind the walls of the palace and was given anything he wanted: fine food, beautiful clothes, wonderful toys, and plenty of servants. Siddhartha knew very little about life outside the palace walls. Then, as Siddhartha grew into a young man, he began to venture out beyond the walls of the palace. Driven by a servant in a horse-drawn chariot, Siddhartha was shocked and dismayed to see what his parents had kept hidden from him. On one trip, he saw a poor old woman bent over and barely able to stand. On another, he saw a sick and hungry man lying by the side of the road, crying out for help. On a third trip, Siddhartha saw two people weeping. All around him, people were suffering. Siddhartha began to worry about all of these people outside the palace walls. What, he wondered, could he do to help them? Seeing all of this suffering, Siddhartha could no longer be happy with his comfortable life, and so he made the decision to leave his riches behind. One night, he crept out of the palace, moved beyond its walls, and headed out along India's dusty roads in search of answers to his questions. For many years, Siddhartha wandered the land, studying with spiritual teachers along the way. He was forever asking his teachers how to conquer suffering and achieve happiness on earth. None of their answers seemed to satisfy him. One night, stopping to rest beneath a fig tree, Siddhartha crossed his legs and vowed that he would not move until he had the answers to his questions. Siddhartha sat under the fig tree for 7 weeks, meditating on his questions. When he finally had the answers he was searching for, he felt like an entirely different person. During those seven weeks, he believed he had received enlightenment. In Buddhism, when someone receives enlightenment, it means the person gains greater understanding of life and no longer desires worldly goods, and then it's believed they are free from suffering. Just so you know. Siddhartha now thought he had a new and deeper understanding about life, why people suffer, and how to end suffering on earth. Siddhartha became known as the Buddha, meaning one who is awake, or enlightened one. Now, what do you suppose Siddhartha the Buddha learned during those 7 weeks? Well, the Buddha learned several lessons, and his lessons became known as the Four Noble Truths. These 4 truths are: 1. All people experience suffering and unhappiness. 2. Suffering and unhappiness come from greed or desiring too many worldly things. 3. Suffering and unhappiness end when unrealistic desires end. And 4. People can end suffering and unhappiness by following a few basic rules. The Buddha's rules may sound familiar to you. They include rules like be kind to others, do not tell lies or cheat or steal, do not be selfish, and do not harm people or animals. Train your mind to think clearly. The Buddha lived a long life, traveling through India, teaching others about the Four Noble Truths and his rules for life. He had many followers in his lifetime, and Buddhism spread to many lands after his death. One person who is credited with helping the spread of Buddhism is a powerful ruler named Asoka. Asoka was not always an enlightened person. Rather, he was a warrior king who led many soldiers into battle, wounding and killing thousands of people as he expanded his great empire. But one particularly violent battle changed Asoka's life. As he rode across the battlefield, seeing how his desires to rule a great empire hurt others, he became horrified by what he had done. Asoka decided that day to change his life and study the teachings of the Buddha. From then on, instead of sending men into battle, he became nonviolent and sent trained teachers throughout Asia to spread the teachings of Buddhism. Often traveling in great caravans, Asoka's trained teachers did more, much more, than preach and teach. In India and far beyond, they carried food and medicine to help people in need. Asoka also ordered his teachers to build hospitals for people and animals, dig wells and irrigation ditches, plant shade trees by the road to comfort weary travelers, and to build roads to ease traveling from place to place. Asoka made sure that the Buddha's message of peace and kindness were carved on big rocks and stone monuments all over India. Although he allowed his people to practice Hinduism and other religions, he wanted everyone to be enlightened by the teachings of Buddha. Stupas, like the one you saw at the beginning of this read aloud, already existed, but Asoka built many more stupas to hold relics, which are important historical objects, of the Buddha. Today, Buddhists travel from all over the world to worship at these sacred shrines. So that is the story of both Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha, or the Enlightened One, and one of the many people who helped spread Buddhism across the Indus River Valley and beyond into China and the other direction as well. His name was Asoka. So that's the end of our first read aloud, and we are going to jump right into our second read aloud. And so if you want to pause here, if that's the only read aloud you need, that's fine. But if not, let's get started. Our second read aloud is about 2 new rivers. So we're going to leave the Indus River Valley, and we are going to travel into China, and we are going to learn about the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. So let's get started. So we have the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, and the Ganges. When we hear these names, what do you imagine in your mind? Where have you heard these names before? What do they have in common? They're all rivers. And what is special about these 5 rivers? These ancient rivers supplied the water needed for the world's first civilizations. Along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates in ancient Mesopotamia, people worked together to grow food, build cities, and develop a way of writing. Pyramids were built up and down the Nile River in Egypt, and in Asia, the Indus and Ganges snaking their way through India and Pakistan, have long been worshipped for their life-giving waters. Today, we are going to learn about the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, two more rivers that belong to this very special group. These two rivers, divided by the high snow-capped Yangtze Mountains, are the two longest rivers in China, and they too are places where early civilizations began. More people live in the Yellow and Yangtze River valleys today than in any other region on Earth. High up in the mountains where the Yellow River begins, its waters are very clear. But as it travels its long route through the high plateaus of the Yangtze Mountains, its color changes. Look at the picture and see if you can guess what makes the water turn yellow. Rain and wind wash the silt, a fine mixture of soil, sand, and clay, from the mountains into the river, making it a muddy yellow. As this happens, the river bottom rises. And if the river bottom rises, what do you suppose happens to the water in the river? It rises too. And then what happens? The river overflows its banks, flooding the land on either side of it. This sounds familiar. So, wondering, is the flooding good or bad? Well, we've already learned the importance of flooding in creating fertile land for crops, but when large rivers like the Yellow River flood, they can also destroy whole cities. For this reason, the Chinese have given the Yellow River two nicknames. One is Mother River, and the other is China's Great Sorrow. The Yangtze River is China's longest river. It lies to the south of the Yellow River. There, the temperature is much warmer, and flooding is less of a problem. Its fertile valley is sometimes called China's Rice Bowl, because its temperate climate is perfect for growing rice. Wheat and millet used in making bread and noodles grow well along the Yellow River, but rice, the main crop of China, had its beginnings along the Yangtze. Together, these two river valleys form the country's greatest food-producing region. The Chinese have always been inventors. Many of their inventions changed the way people farmed, making the river valleys more and more productive. For example, the ancient Chinese invented seed planting. Instead of scattering seeds on top of the earth, they developed seed drills, used for planting seeds in ordered rows. They invented iron plows and harnesses so that horses or oxen could easily pull the plows. And to get water from low ground to the crops planted on higher ground, the Chinese invented a pump to irrigate the fields. Because they were innovative people, farming became easy. More and more nomadic people began to settle permanently along the banks of the two great rivers, where the food was abundant. Then, the same thing happened in China that happened in Mesopotamia. Egypt and India, cities emerged. Many separate cities and areas sprang up along the banks of the rivers, each led by a powerful king. The kings ruled over the people, much like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. The people built walls, houses, and temples. They made tools and weapons of wood, stone, bronze, and iron. They also built boats. And with the invention of copper coins, they began to trade with one another up and down both rivers. As they traded and farmed, the Chinese continued inventing new tools and systems. One of these was writing, which you will soon learn about, an important trademark of any civilization. All right, so that is the end of our second read aloud. I'm going to stop there. So today we read about Buddhism, which is a major world religion. And we also moved from our area in the Indus River, Middle Eastern Valley, over to the other side of Asia, the huge continent. And now we are working in China. So this is where we're going to end. Remember that if you need any of the questions or vocabulary words for these lessons to work on at home, please let me know. And I will see you in our next video. All right, bye.